He was executed one day after his birthday. No apology, no regret, just 7 minutes of final words that stunned everyone in the room. On the surface, he looked like the last person you'd ever suspect, clean-cut, military-affiliated, charming. But behind that image was a trail of violence so disturbing it earned him a name investigators still won't forget. And what ultimately exposed him wasn't a witness, it was a single late-night decision he thought no one would ever notice. On paper, Rosendo Rodriguez III looked like he had everything going for him. He was young, well-groomed, and confident. He attended college, joined a co-ed fraternity, worked steady jobs, and even served as a Marine reservist. No criminal record, no history of violence. To people around him, he came off as polite, calm, and almost disarmingly normal. Friends didn't describe him as strange or aggressive. They described him as charming. The kind of guy who blended in easily, who didn't draw attention, who seemed safe. That image followed him everywhere, from campus parties to family gatherings, and it worked. No one questioned him, no one suspected what was happening behind closed doors. But that polished exterior was doing more than hiding flaws. It was hiding years of behavior that never made it into police reports. Women who felt scared but stayed quiet. Moments that were brushed off, ignored, or never connected. By the time anyone started looking closely, the damage was already done. And that illusion of normalcy would finally crack during one quiet weekend in Texas, when Rosendo decided to stay alone in a hotel room for reasons that had nothing to do with training. In early September, Rosendo checked into a hotel under his own name, but not with his unit. While other reservists stayed together, he chose a room by himself. He even rented a bright red pickup truck for the weekend, something that immediately stood out later. At the time, it didn't raise alarms. It just looked like a guy enjoying some freedom. He told friends he already had plans. Said he was meeting someone. And by Sunday night, he found exactly what he was looking for. Her name was Summer. She was 29 years old, a mother of 4, and trying to survive in a city that hadn't been kind to her. Life had pushed her into dangerous situations, but she was still someone's daughter, still loved, still mattered. What most people didn't know, what made this case explode later, was that she was also connected to an ongoing federal investigation. That night, a woman who knew Summer spotted her sitting in the passenger seat of a red pickup truck. She looked calm, comfortable. She said the man driving was just a client they'd been using together. Nothing seemed wrong. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Just hours later, keycard records showed Rosendo entering his hotel room in the early morning. Summer went in with him. What happened behind that closed door would shock even veteran investigators. And the most disturbing part? It didn't end there. Whatever happened in that room wasn't quick, and it wasn't accidental. Investigators would later piece together a level of violence so extreme it stunned everyone who reviewed the evidence. The assault escalated fast, then kept going. Blow after blow, injuries everywhere. This wasn't panic, it was control. At some point, the situation crossed a line there was no coming back from. Summer was overpowered, silenced, and left barely clinging to life. And instead of calling for help, instead of running, Rosendo made a decision that revealed exactly who he was. Hours later, while the city slept, security cameras captured him walking calmly through a store. No rush, no nervous glances. He picked out a brand new suitcase and a box of gloves, paid, and walked out like it was just another errand. That single purchase told investigators everything they needed to know. Because when he returned to the hotel room, he used that suitcase not for travel, but to erase what he'd done. And the way he did it would later become the detail no one could forget. In the early hours of the morning, Rosendo carried the suitcase out of the hotel and tossed it into a dumpster like it was nothing. Then he went back inside, rented a movie, and went to sleep. By sunrise, he checked out calmly, returned the rental truck spotless, and left town. To him, it was over. But one small detail ruined everything. The suitcase was brand new. Tags still attached. When workers at a local landfill noticed it, curiosity kicked in. It was heavier than it should have been. When they unzipped it, the truth came spilling out, and the entire case changed instantly. Investigators started where criminals rarely think twice, at the purchase itself. That barcode led straight to a store. Surveillance footage showed a man buying a suitcase and gloves in the middle of the night. Clear enough to see his face. Even clearer when they pulled the transaction. He didn't use cash, he used his own card. Within hours, police had a name, a timeline, and a hotel room waiting to be searched. And once they stepped inside, there was no denying what had happened. But as detectives dug deeper into his past, they realized this wasn't an isolated crime at all. It was a repeat. As investigators dug through Rosendo's digital trail, something unsettling surfaced. He wasn't just following news about the suitcase case, he was obsessively searching his own name. Refreshing articles, checking updates, watching to see if anyone had connected the dots yet. Then they noticed something else in his history. A name from an older, unresolved case. A teenage girl who had vanished years earlier without a trace. She was 16 when she disappeared from her home in the middle of the night. No forced entry, no struggle. She left behind everything, keys, phone, wallet, as if she'd planned to come right back. Her family searched for years with no answers. No suspects. No body. Until now, phone records showed calls made to her house in the early morning hours on the night she vanished. The calls came from Rosendo's phone. The timing lined up perfectly. He lived close enough. And suddenly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Same late-night contact. Same control. Same silence afterward. What started as one horrifying discovery had just reopened a mystery that haunted an entire family for years. And investigators were about to learn just how long Rosendo had been hiding in plain sight. Once Rosendo was in custody, the story didn't slow down, it exploded. Women started coming forward, not one or two, but several, all describing eerily similar experiences. At first, everything seemed normal. Then something shifted. Control, force, fear. These weren't strangers connected by coincidence. They were classmates, acquaintances, people who knew him well enough to trust him. Each account revealed the same switch flipping behind closed doors. And for years, none of it had been reported in a way that stuck. Investigators now saw the full picture. This wasn't a moment of rage or a bad decision. It was a pattern that had been building quietly for a long time. The charm wasn't accidental, it was a tool. A way to disarm, to get close, to make sure no one would believe the victim if they spoke up. By the time the evidence was laid out, it was clear this wasn't about one crime or even two. It was about who he was when no one was watching. And despite everything stacked against him, Rosendo still believed he could control the outcome. That's when prosecutors made him an offer that would change everything. With the evidence overwhelming, prosecutors offered Rosendo a way out. If he admitted guilt and accepted life behind bars, the death penalty would be taken off the table. The families would get answers. The case would finally be over. At first, it looked like he would take it. But in the courtroom, at the last possible moment, everything changed. Rosendo suddenly claimed he didn't understand what was happening. Said he was confused. Said he couldn't follow his own attorney's advice. The deal collapsed on the spot. That single decision sealed his fate. From that moment on, prosecutors stopped negotiating. The case went to trial, and the story that unfolded in front of the jury was brutal, methodical, and impossible to explain away. Every detail pointed in the same direction. Every attempt to deny it only made things worse. The verdict came back quickly. Guilty. And years later, after appeals ran out and the final date was set, Rosendo would be given one last chance to speak. What he chose to say would leave the room in silence. On the evening of his execution, Rosendo was calm. Strapped down, surrounded by witnesses, he was asked if he had any final words. He spoke for several minutes, but never once apologized. Instead, he thanked prison staff, made accusations, quoted scripture, and talked about his own suffering. He avoided looking at the victims' families altogether. Moments later, it was over. For the families left behind, there was no relief, only an ending. No speech could undo what had been taken. No explanation could fill the years of loss. 2 lives were gone, one of them barely begun, and the damage stretched far beyond a courtroom or a prison wall. But even now, one question refuses to disappear. Given the pattern, the silence, the years he went unnoticed, was this really the end of the story, or just the last chapter anyone ever found?